Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this 1010 webinar of today. My name is Els, and I will present to you this webinar today, together with my colleague, of course. Today he will present you the standard contribution to the EU trade policies. Now, before we start, let me just remind you that you are all muted today, so you are not able to speak out loud. But of course, you have the possibility to ask your questions via the questions panel on your GoToWebinar control panel. We will review the questions after the presentation and answer at the end of the presentation. If the questions are not answered right away, you will receive them or they will be put online in written formats. Well, now it's time to give the floor to the speaker of today. My colleague Eric Marchand is here for you to present you the topic of today. Eric, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. So my name is Eric Marchand, and I've been working in Sensenelec for the past 19 years, mainly in international cooperation. And I thank you very much for your interest in this session, during which I'm going to try and briefly explain how standardization contributes to increasing market access opportunities and opening up new markets for European companies that have a global outreach at least. In order to do this, I will use different tools that we have developed and adapted over the years, and also that we have tailored depending on the countries or regions, and also EU agreements. First, standards are an essential tool in trade relations between the EU and its major trade partners, and they play an increasingly important role in the context of the evolution of the economy and trade. But why? In fact, when we have a look at the way the global trade landscapes evolves, we can see that over the past few years there's been relative progress in multilateral trade and discussions and within the WTO. Also, we have seen a multiplication of bilateral and multilateral free trade agreements in this regard. According to WTO figures, from 1948 to 1994, so in 46 years, there's been 124 trade agreements that were concluded between the EU and its partners. But over the past 20 years or so, there's been 400 of these trade agreements that were concluded. We see a higher interdependence between economies around the world. On one side, we see a steady increase in the share of trade in relation to the country's GDPs. And this despite the crisis of 2008. If we take the example of the EU, in 2004, the EU 28 exports represented about 35% of the EU's GDP. But in 2012, this figure represents 45%. So it is quite a huge increase in just a few years. On the other side, we also need to take into account what we call the global value chain concept. Production is nowadays decoupled in a number of steps that can be carried out in different places. So there is need for a common language to help working together. And this is exactly where standards have to play a role for trade enablers and also supporting fair competition in global trade, thanks to agreed common specifications. This also means that the adoption of identical standards worldwide opens opportunities for market access for European industry, even if standardization is just one element, but an important element of what we call the quality infrastructure. And indeed, modifying the content of a standard creates technical barriers to trade and leads to market fragmentation, confusion for market operators, and also increased production costs. In order to support EU trade policies towards other countries and regions, Sen and Senelec have developed 6 different tools that I'm going to try and explain in the next few slides. This very slide here lists on the left side these 6 tools that I was referring to, and on the right side the countries or regions with which the EU has trade or regulatory dialogues and for which there is a technical agreement between or Senelec and these countries and regions. However, I must tell you that we have other agreements in place with countries and regions outside the EU, the Senelec membership, which have no official trade agreements with the EU, or because these trade links are currently suspended. Just to give you an example, with Russia we have a cooperation agreement, but the EU has suspended its relations with Russia, of course. Depending on the EU trade policy with regard to one country or region, and also depending on the socio-political and economic priorities of our partners, one or another type of tool of agreement is applied. I'm now going to explain to you the 6 tools in details that we have developed over the years and adapted as well. And I will provide you for each of these tools some information on their main features and also the countries or regions that are involved. And I will also provide you with a specific case study per tool. The first tool I would like to tell you about is about what we call the affiliate status within SEN and Senelec. This status is available to countries, to national standards bodies of countries that are candidates or potential candidate to EU accession. This concerns currently Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina and Montenegro, because the others that are candidate or potential candidates to EU accession are already SEN and Senelec members. This status is a very strong type of relationship, of agreement, and it offers these affiliates to have full and direct access to the database of our standards, and of course they have the possibility to sell them once they are adopted in their own country. They have also the opportunity to participate in as observers in our technical committees. But of course they have very strict obligations, among others the notification of adoption of our standards, but also the withdrawal of conflicting standards in their country. Another stringent obligation they have in terms of participation in technical committees is that they have the obligation to adopt all the standards of the technical committees in which they send observers. The case study I've chosen for you is Serbia. It's a very specific case because Serbia, as you all know, is a candidate to EU accession since 2009. They have been an affiliate of SEN and Senelec since probably 13 or 14 years. And if we talk about the economic environment, the imports from the EUs in Serbia represent 63% of their total imports, and in terms of exports this figure represents 66%. Over the years, Serbia, ISS has adopted more than 91% of our catalogues of SEN and Senelec, and they are extremely active also in sending observers in technical committees. And as you know, since January 2017, ISS has become a SEN and Senelec member. The second tool I wanted to tell you about is a tool that is a bit, it's quite the same as the affiliate status. It's what we call, according to our new partnership concept, the companion standardization body status with SEN and Senelec. This is almost the same, but there is all companions have a bit less rights and a bit less obligations. And these are countries that are not eligible for EU accession. So countries from the European neighbourhood policy of the European Union, but also other countries outside this region. They also have, like the affiliates, the opportunity to adopt ENs without restrictions, so they have full access to our catalogue of standards. They can sell them in their country. and they also have the opportunity to send observers in all technical committees, but here there is a little restriction. There is a need for an approval from the technical committee, an official decision, in order for us to allow observerships in these technical committees. The example I've chosen for you is Moldova, because Moldova is very much into EU integration. They were affiliates before we revised our partnership concepts, and Moldova as a country has concluded in 2014 what we call an association agreement with the European Union, including a deep and comprehensive free trade area. Which includes a standardization component. Moldova has adopted since now, has adopted about 60% of our European standards, out of which 93% of harmonized ENs in support of EU legislation. So this is quite a good amount of standards that they have adopted in Moldova, and also not only they adopt the standards, but also they translate the most important standards, which is very useful for their industry, of course. I met a Moldovan delegation last week in the General Assembly of the Eurasian Council for Standardization, Certification and Metrology, so grouping the 12 countries of the CIS countries, and they told me that in their work program they intend to reach 80% of adoptions by the end of 2018. So they are very motivated, and thanks to our agreement they can fulfill this association agreement that they concluded with the EU, because our companion standards body agreement is fully in line with this association agreement. The third tool I would like to tell you about is what we call the cooperation agreement. I was mentioning the companion agreements a few minutes ago, and in these companion agreements, CEN and CENELEC can be viewed as one-stop shops for our partners. They help themselves in the system according to their needs, and we do not require much reciprocity, even if there are some obligations as well. But in the case of cooperation agreement, this is completely different. These are strategic agreements with national organizations, standardization organizations, and this type of agreement requires from all partners commitment, reciprocity and transparency. This type of agreement is supported by a roadmap, very specific roadmap for their implementation, and this is very much important for CEN and CENELEC to develop these type of partnerships as well, because there's a huge interest from CEN and CENELEC to develop relations with these strategic countries. Talking about the roadmap, it includes the organization of different events, workshops and so on, exchange of information, institutional but also strategic as well, with bilateral meetings, for example during the ISO and IC general meetings every year. We develop also specific technical cooperation in some topics, so this is a very, very comprehensive type of agreement as well. The case study I've chosen is about Canada. It's a very interesting story because we have reached some good achievements under this cooperation with Canada. You are probably aware that there has been some negotiations between the EU and Canada on a comprehensive and economic trade agreement, what we call CETA. And I come from Wallonia in the south of Belgium, and this is probably the only reason why Wallonia is known in Europe now, is because they were against this agreement, but never mind. To give you an example of this good cooperation we have with Canada, with SCC, last year Canada had an issue with the revision of European standards on timber. that was going to set up technical barriers to trade for the Canadian industry to access the European market. And through this agreement, and through the dialogue that we have with them, we managed to find a solution, a decent solution, in a win-win situation. This technical cooperation, there are technical cooperation in key sectors, and this technical cooperation has then motivated SCC to get to the next level of cooperation with CEN, at least, and they have just become a companion standards body to CEN. So then having direct access to technical committees and also direct access to the catalog of our standards. So this type of agreement can also be complementary to other types of agreement. The fourth tool I want to tell you about is about memoranda of understandings that we sign not with standards bodies over the world, but with regions, regional standardization organizations. It's about the same as for the cooperation agreements, but there's a few differences. In fact, these agreements go hand in hand with trade negotiations as well. They are tailored depending on the regions, but they have the same corpus of activities in general. We have currently concluded 10 memoranda of understandings over the world with regional organizations, and 5 of them are extremely active. So this is the Gulf, the CIS countries, the Americas, and also Africa. And we have also 2 memoranda of understanding in the pipeline. The first one is with the Eurasian Economic Commission. So with Russia, Kazakhstan, Belarus, Kyrgyzstan, and Armenia. This MOU will be signed actually during our next General Assemblies in June in Hindenburg. And with Sarso, it will be, so Sarso is South Asia, it will be probably in the course of this year, hopefully. The case study I've chosen is with the Gulf, because it's extremely active and also it supports the relations and the agreements that the EU has concluded with the Gulf Cooperation Council. They signed a cooperation agreement in 1988. There's been some bumps in the road because they've been suspended, then they resumed it again, and so on. And they are actually negotiating a free trade agreement between the Gulf and the EU. And here again, we support these policies from the EU, and we have signed in 2012 an MOU with GSO, the GCC Standardization Organization, which groups 7 countries from the Gulf. And here again, we have developed a very specific roadmap. We are involved in many events to promote the European standardization model, among others. And we have technical exchanges. And just to give you an example, we have developed, there is no observerships in MOUs, unfortunately, but if there is a reciprocal interest from technical bodies, then we try to set up a platform where they can discuss together. And this is what we call the technical cooperation agreements. We had concluded one in the oil and gas sector with CEN-TC 12 about 3 years and a half ago, and we now have just concluded a technical cooperation agreement in the toys sector with CEN-TC 52. And in fact, this story is a very good story because they originally CEN-TC 52 was very much interested, GSO as well, but GSO didn't have any technical committee. So they decided, thanks to our cooperation, to create that Gulf Technical Committee on Toys. And so we signed a cooperation agreement. And in fact, the Toys Directive was transposed in the Gulf, and we will have later this year a workshop, as we did last year as well on the low voltage. We will organize a workshop in which some Gulf experts will come and explain the technical regulations on toys that transposed the Toys Directive, and we will see what about the differences, and we will try as much as possible to influence the revision of these technical regulations. We did that with the Low Voltage Directive and the Gulf last year, and it had some good outputs. We also have with GSO, we also have what we call a regional license agreement, which allows GSO to adopt European standards for adoption at regional level, at GSO level, but also for adoption by GSO members. The fifth tool I would like to tell you about is called the license agreements. In fact, we have some countries outside the Standardization membership have sometimes some interest in adopting just a few European standards, and in these cases we offer them the opportunity to get these standards for adoption. However, we do not really advertise much this type of agreement because they are very stringent, very stringent. There are lots of obligations, and among others, they have to adopt identically, but completely identically. There is no room for any modification whatsoever in the standards, and this is quite stringent, as I was saying, type of agreement. We have so far 22 countries outside the Standardization membership that have concluded with us some license agreements. About 2,700 ENs were provided for adoption, out of which 1,200 were our harmonized standards. Talking about the EU trade, the EU has a free trade, has initialed a free trade agreement with Singapore in 2014, and Spring Singapore, the national standard body of Singapore, has adopted so far 96 European standards, out of which 40% are harmonized standards, mainly in the construction and mechanical engineering sectors. We expect, if these negotiations, this agreement is put in place between the EU and Singapore, we may expect that one day Spring would be interested in getting the companion standards body status with SEN and or SENELEC. So this is the tool number 2 that I was explaining a bit earlier. The last tool I would like to tell you about is not really an agreement, it's a project. It's what we call the visibility projects. These are projects that are co-funded by the European Commission, EFTA, and the 3 European Standards Organizations, so ETSI as well. We have currently 2 of these projects, one in China and one in India. And we have 2 experts on site, and these experts have specific tasks. Their mission is fourfold. The first one is to increase the visibility of European standardization with the authorities on site, the European industry in India and in China, and also with the Indian and Chinese industry. They also have the task to improve the contacts with key ministries and agencies, and in these countries it's not easy to see what's going on sometimes, so these experts are very variable in this regard as well. And also they have to provide information to the European industries on the Indian and Chinese standardization issues and systems, which is very complicated as well. And they also try as much as possible to foster and facilitate the cooperation in some priority sectors. And here, SEN and SENELEC members and European partners are very much useful in this regard, because we really need your input for us to address your issues and the specific sectors you would like us to put on the table within the context of this project. So these are very, very specific projects. We have two so far, one in India and one in China, and we may expect in the near future to have maybe more projects of that kind. This is almost the end of my short presentation. I just wanted to provide you with 5 learning points from this intervention. The first one is that Senencenelec agreements are really, as you can see, in line with trade links that the EU has with its partners all over the world. The second key learning point is that we have really tailored agreements to meet the trade objectives and also depending on the economic priorities, for example, of these partners. We also try as much as possible to disseminate intelligence and information to the European Commission and NEFTA in order to progress in the implementation of these agreements, trade agreements, but also to Senencenelec community and our stakeholders in general. And we have at our disposal quite lots of information on the partnerships that we are implementing with our partners. In some cases, as you can see from Canada, with Canada for example, these tools that I have presented are complementary. And also the last thing, last but not least, as they say, we live in a dynamic and evolving environment because we constantly adapt our tools with time to meet the trade objectives and also to meet our own Senencenelec interest as well. Thank you very much for your attention.